Hey, Warpugs. So today I'm checking out something from Hobambles, and guys, the last time we saw anything from Hobambles, it was talking about the Rattel, which was apparently named after the honey badger. And frankly, it was aptly named. Guys, this, however, this is bound to be a little bit interesting because this is about the history of Bike Squad. Now, Bike Squad sounds like a failed Marvel superhero troop, but at the same time, I haven't heard about this. Typically, we only hear about certain, like, here, and especially me when I don't have time to research certain things. You don't have time to hear about, like, every military unit. You just don't. You barely have time to hear about the major ones. So, hearing about this, I love learning about stuff like this. I really, really do. We're going to jump right into this, guys. All of Hobambles' links are going to be in the description down below. I highly recommend that you check out his video on the Rattel. I really enjoyed that. It's also a good way to see how, like, because, you know, mainly we look at, you know, like military procurement from Russia, America, from Ukraine, from Britain, France, Germany, from Poland. We don't get to see it from other parts of the world that often, so this is actually kind of interesting to see. So let's jump right into it. All links in the description below. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and definitely go check out Hobambles. Let's get into it.
Hello, and thank you for clicking. I need to preface this by saying that I am not a historian, and I'm working with the information that I have available to me. While I am trying to conduct my due diligence, I am only one man yabbering about outdated vehicles I quite like.
That's everybody, my guy.
And ask that you please take what I say with a grain of salt. With that out of the way, let's get into it.
Let's go.
Imagine for a moment that you're a South African Defense Forces general way back in the mid-1960s.
Okay.
Your desk is awash with various intelligence documents, each of which paint an increasingly grim picture of a coming conflict within your assigned province of Southwest Africa.
Oh.
A well-organized group known as SWAPO, short for Southwest Africa People's Organization, have been playing a twisted game of political football, campaigning for the release of the apartheid regime on the land now known as Namibia. However, Southwest Africa is rich in a resource that South Africa can ill afford to lose on the world stage.
Okay.
Uranium. The 1960s was a thrilling and all too terrifying time to be alive. The United States and USSR locked horns in a desperate race to space.
I love the fact that he uses Kerbal Space Program as that, because that's essentially what we were doing, launching ourselves to space on rockets with very little understanding of what we were doing. But hey, let's do it. Let's go.
Only for the betterment of mankind, but to develop better rockets for the copious number of nuclear warheads also being produced.
You gotta have goals.
My friend, History of Everything, has done a great video at the start of the space race. Go harass him there. South Africa,
didn't know about this.
A relatively small blip on the world stage, feared the increasing expansion of communism spreading through Africa and sought to be as dangerous as the other world powers. For protection, of course. However, in South Africa's bid to become a nuclear deterrent, it had inadvertently stumbled onto the world stage and caught the attention of both the Great Eagle and Menacing Bear.
Oh.
SWAPO, who were staunch opponents to the South African government, eventually turned towards a more insurgent style of fighting, and the USSR and Egypt assisted with overseas training in guerrilla warfare as well as supplied weapons and military advisors. As early as 1966, the South African police had reported that militant forces were sneaking in through Zambia's borders to harass South African units. One group of SWAPO insurgents, known as Group 2, got lost in Angola and murdered several Angolan citizens. This second group was mostly captured before they reached the self-governing state of Hobambles at the far north of Southwest Africa. We're not going to get into the political dynamics of these self-governing states, heavy use of quotes, but just know that these states were set up by the South African government as a way to essentially eliminate racial tensions by confining ethnic tribes to set areas of lands, as well as allowing the South African government to get cheap labor.
Of course.
This was the 60s. Bad shit happened in the 60s.
Yes.
Get over it.
Yes. Things sucked. For a long time. They still suck in a lot of places.
Now, there was a third group in this story, and this group could be described as rather ballsy.
Ballsy. Okay.
Setting up a training facility 40 kilometers south of the Southwest African and Angolan border in far west of Womberland. The South African police, assisted with SADF personnel, assaulted the camp by helicopter in late August 1966.
Okay.
The camp was mostly empty, having less than 20 personnel, of which 2 were killed and 8 captured, with the rest presumably escaping, but I couldn't really find documents confirming or denying the claim. At the moment, SWAPO is nothing more than a thorn in your side. The ciggy clutched between your digits smolders away, burning agonizingly close to your stained fingers. However, something stirs within your bowels, an inescapable feeling of anxiety and dread.
Okay.
War is on the horizon.
Hooray.
Speaking of war, have you played the new game Wars of War? The ultimate new shoot-'em-up RTS fucking space simulator that exists, where you get to shoot your friends, shoot the enemy, No, I actually can't really say that. Shoot the enemy, and how much does all this cost? Absolutely nothing, because I make all the money in microtransactions. You want to buy a better gun? Better cop up $500, kiddo. Hey, you want a little bit of invulnerability to fuck over that guy? Guess what? That's $2,000. Wars of War. Give me all your money.
Okay, so I'm in it.
Pre-1974, the SAP was the main force to deal with these encampments. However, the scale of the conflicts and the more frequent use of anti-personnel and anti-vehicle mines saw the SAP struggle to contain hostilities. In that same year, 1974, the SADF oversaw all counterinsurgency operations, or COINOPS. The SADF had learned some hard lessons during its time as a counterinsurgency operator, Operation Savannah being one such key lesson. The SADF, with the backing of the United States government, tried to push out SWAPO, Soviet, and Cuban forces out of southern Angola in an attempt to support friendly UNITA forces, but got their asses handed to them on a silver platter and subsequently pushed back to the border. This wouldn't really be the end of border raids, and regular border incursions would be commonplace throughout the duration of the war. The problem with regular raids from both sides is that vehicles such as tanks, armored fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and other heavy equipment are expensive, both to maintain, to recover, and to lose. Vehicles like the
Airland armored car
are good if you know where the enemy is. But what if you just need a regular patrol? Or hell, a quick reaction force? Big and heavy vehicles are too cumbersome for the bush and too large for the open plains. Their silhouette easily spotted by smaller teams of foot mobiles, not to mention the fuel and maintenance required for out-of-the-way outposts. Well, this is where the South African Defence Force's Dog School comes into play.
There we go.
The Dog School was set up in 1964 in Voortrekkerhoogte, Pretoria. I know I've butchered that, but my goggly thing at the back of my voice isn't working right now, so
there we go.
Deal with it. Its main task was, unsurprisingly, to train dogs and horses for both the SAP and SADF. This unit sought to acquire hounds like the infamous German Shepherd, Rottweilers, Border Collies, and even Labrador Retrievers.
Oh, look at the pupper.
Kind of funny to think that a Labrador Retriever,
Diggity doggo.
you know, the thing that goes and fetches shit, probably gonna bite some poor dude's bottle off during this period, but you know what? Apparently Labrador Retrievers are a thing, so we're running with it.
Okay.
Back on topic, the dog school's other main priority was researching canine diseases and nutrition, and later breeding. Units equipped with dogs could maintain an average speed of about 15 kilometers over 4 hours, which is a hell of a lot longer and faster than your fat ass can get to the fridge.
True. This is
Now,
truth.
The equestrian school, which split off from the dog school into its own separate detachment in 1974, was responsible for not only training the horses to not sprint off the first sign of trouble, but also teach SAP and SADF units how to ride and use their steeds effectively.
And the thing about it is, training horses for combat is a lot harder than people would assume. A lot harder than people would assume. It was hard enough to teach them how to handle mounted combat when it was just swords and shields, and arrows, much less gunpowder. But I wouldn't even want to think about how to train a horse in modern combat.
They supplied everything horse-related to its various units, and taught recruits how to care for their grass-powered speed demons. The horses and their riders served a few main purposes: patrol squadrons, quick reaction forces, reconnaissance, and most importantly to this video, tracking the movement of enemy personnel.
Okay.
The Sand People, or Bushmen as they were known then, had been evacuated during Operation Savannah in 1976 by Bravo Group, and thus saved from eradication by the Bantu-speaking peoples. The Sand People were the key to teaching SADF troops their bush knowledge, including how to stalk, how to identify and track spoor through the plains and the thicket, how to trap small game, and find water in the unforgiving deserts, open savanna, and even the insect-ridden swamps. These units proved most essential in finding where MPLA and planned patrol routes and encampments were located, both across the border and within Southwest Africa.
Okay.
As the war progressed, so too did the operational ranges and the intensity of engagements. Horses are great, but limited in speed and range.
Right.
Foot patrols do an excellent job of meticulously clearing an area, but often take days to achieve. At some point after 1974, someone, somewhere, saw the wide open plains of Hobambles and thought, you know what? I'd kill to race around here with my motorbike. That sentiment somehow reached the ear of General Magnus Malan, an avid horseman and a driving force behind the SADF's decision to set up a specialist motorcycle-mounted infantry unit known as Bike Squad. This
Bike
unit,
Squad,
christened as 1 Swaspes, or Southwest African Specialized Unit, was battalion-sized in nature and focused on the deployment of human and dog trackers, as well as horse and motorbike-mounted troops.
Okay.
The unit fell under the command of SWATF, or the Southwest African Territorial Force. Commanded by Major Dawid Mentz, the unit opened applications to volunteers of the regular South African forces. However, the selection process was tough.
Okay.
Really tough.
Troops were adjusted to a totally different diet and would often go days, sometimes weeks, without a shower. The reason? Smell. Like in the jungles of Vietnam, smell was a primary sense to use when navigating the dense thicket. Western diets include fatty meals like steak and pork, which makes defecation oily and reeks. The smell alone could clear out a Mickey D's nuts on your throat lavatory out, but would also be a death sentence in the bush. Troops' diets were lean, including sadza, or pap as my South African friends would prefer to call it, a maize paste that is rich in calories and helps to bung up the digestive tract.
Nice.
Chicken, and certain types of vegetables. One of them is very popular in Southern Africa, but I can't say the name because YouTube's AI has no semblance of context or meaning and would absolutely nuke my channel into fucking oblivion.
Wow, really?
Some intakes of 50 to 60 volunteers barely produced one platoon, with attrition rates as high as 75 to a whopping 90% over a 9-month course, in which recruits were taught how to ride both horses and motorbikes. The horseman part of the course proving particularly difficult for some, and many fell to injuries, and others were often RTU'd, or retired to original unit for a variety of reasons, probably because they kinda sucked.
Maybe.
Once graduated, soldiers became part of Bike Squad, a highly specialized group of individuals that served as motorized cavalry, and are the only known unit to have deliberately ridden into an active engagement. One source, who requested to remain anonymous, spoke of how Bike Squad was used in larger operations involving their entire battalion. Bikes would ride alongside the throttles and buffels, and were able to dismount and engage quickly. Alternatively, Bike Squad would be used to flush out enemy troops from the thicket, either along the sides of engaging infantry or opposite to engaging friendly forces, effectively cutting off their ability to retreat.
Okay.
Bike Squad, whose 30-man platoons were numbered 1 through 14, originally trained on bikes like the Suzuki SP370. These bikes had a single-cylinder, 4-stroke engine. The bike overall was a good mediator between the absolute novices and the more experienced bikers, and the engine was simple enough as an introduction to basic maintenance. The wheel sizes and suspension, whose sizes affect the ground clearance, dampening and overall stability of the bike, were well suited for the safe and catered grounds of the training complex.
You've got to make I said this in his Rattel video, but I'll say it again. You have got to match your environment. You have got to match your terrain. You cannot sit there and put a Humvee in the bush of South Africa. The people inside the Humvee are going to be applied to the walls on a regular basis. You have to match what you're doing.
But suffered in the field. The bike was too heavy without the laden infantryman and was basically obsolete compared to newer models coming out at the time. During operations, until 1980, the main bike was the Honda XL 350. However, these also suffered similar drawbacks to the Suzuki's, being heavy and cumbersome, but were incredibly reliable and easy to maintain and fix when out in a backwater FOB. The double shock suspension system allowed for basic tuning to make the dampeners stiffer for off-road use and prevented bikers from being thrown off when hitting a ditch or an anthill.
Okay.
Right around the same time, from about 1979 to 1980, the Honda XR 500, specifically the big wheel version, became the de facto training and operations bike, with newer versions including the Pro Link, which ditched the dual rear shocks for a single shock, which made the bike much lighter and helped pave the way for modern motocross bikes. These bikes were highly customizable, often fitted with motocross shocks and springs that were far stiffer than stock, as well as stronger handlebars and even disc brakes. I mentioned both XL and XR just above, and wanted to add this little tidbit in, mainly because I'm too lazy to go back and fix it. XL and XRs are basically opposites of the same name.
Okay.
XL means that the bike is dual purpose, primarily designed for leisure, hence the L in XL, but is capable of going off-road and had a rev counter, whereas the XR variant is an off-road only bike, the R meaning rally, and did not feature a rev counter.
Okay.
I had mentioned a Pro Link on the XR 500s, but what is it, and how does it differ from a regular Link? Links were previously fabricated bars that attached the rear wheel to the main body of the motorbike, and the dual shocks were relatively easy to install on these links. However, bikers found that these links could only hold up to so much abuse before cracking, or worse, snapping. And the last thing anyone wants is to be under fire and having a busted bike. The Pro Link was the direct answer to these problems. Instead of being fabricated, these newer links were instead forged from better quality metals that could withstand a lot more punishment. The new links also allowed the R&D teams at the factories to play around with the suspension systems and develop what we know as a modern motocross bike with a single shock located underneath the seat.
Okay.
Motorbikes are loud. Everyone knows this. One would think that it would be wiser to muffle them to get the edge on the enemy. But what if you wanted to play a little bit of psychological warfare?
Why not?
Perhaps lean into the loudness some more. Well, that's exactly what happened. I'm not entirely sure when this started happening, as I've not found a conclusive source, but bikers were encouraged to remove the mufflers of their bikes, allowing the raw engine to scream and shout its way across the South African savannah. Essentially, Bike Squad is coming to get ya! This also had the opposite effect of loudly broadcasting where any team was at any given point, and allowed Op4 forces to get some nasty ambushes off. It should also be said that all shiny surfaces were painted black, as the glint would alert the enemy of the exact position, even at night. Now, it should be noted that bikes weren't the only vehicles that assisted SWAT within its operations. Other vehicles also assisted Bike Squad and its equestrian counterparts. Logistically speaking, the SAML series, specifically the SAML 50 and SAML 100, supplied the FOBs in larger camps, with the SAML 20 being used for harder to reach outposts.
And you can see, like, pretty much every vehicle that we've seen here has been purpose-built for the kind of terrain that they will be seeing out there. Every single one of them is high off the ground. We have not seen many low off the ground variants of anything at this point. And it goes back to what I said when I was watching his Rattel video. You have to build for where you're at, or else you're just going to wind up with, a bunch of, well, in some cases you wind up with a stuck vehicle. In other cases, you wind up with one that shattered its axle because it came down on it too hard. because the front wheels went over something that the back, and there just wasn't enough clearance. I mean, everything in here, it's like watching a completely different mode of thinking when it comes to actually committing to any kind of warfare. And everything here that I've seen so far, trucks, infantry fighting vehicles, even the bikes themselves are built for the terrain that they're going to be crossing. And yeah, like, I know I've gone on about that, but it really is such a valid point.
A recovery vehicle called the Withings, which were SAML 50 and 100 recovery-based vehicles with a mine-proof driver's cab, assisted with recovering heavier vehicles like the Buffel or the Ratel series. The Queffel, Afrikaans for the iconic go-away bird,
Nice!
was a SAML 100 whose tray was modified to carry horses in and out of rotation or for medical emergencies.
Okay.
Some other notable vehicles include the Buffel mine-resistant vehicle, which was used for larger reactionary actions, as well as its other variant, the Minimog, which was used for supplies. The Ratel series also played a part, including something called the Ratel 10. Now, I looked into this, and a user that goes by the name Unfit Ferret, who joined me in my Subnautica livestream quite recently, helped out quite a bit by deciphering what the Ratel 10 was.
Okay.
I'd initially thought it was something to do with the Ratel series of IFVs, Ratel 10. It's got to be something to do with the IFV, right? But no, it's a mountain bike.
Oh!
There's a mountain bike called the Ratel 10, and this fucking bike cost me like 2 months worth of research trying to figure out what the fuck the Ratel 10 was. I was nearly driven fucking insane. So you can very much thank Unfit Ferret for getting this video up and running, because without him this thing would still be making me go absolutely fucking benzy. Anyway, getting back on topic. One SWAT-based troops often packed light, usually equipped with no more than the R1 or R4 rifles. Medium machine guns, like the FN Mag or locally produced Denel SS-77, weren't often carried, as the pouch magazines and belts were difficult to handle and a menace to reload on the fly.
Right.
Helmets, notably the SATF-issued Pisspot helmet, were usually paired with World War II era pilot-style goggles that were often discarded because of the uncool factor. However, after a few nasty falls, troops would wear their helmets with standard MX goggles.
Okay.
Leather MX boots were also standard issue. However, these were often not used in the field, as troops often hiked and ran many kilometers, usually when tracking spoor or chasing suspected poachers and insurgents. A question you might ask is why the tracking of spoor is so essential. Surely bad men wear boots, and boots can be easily tracked. Yes?
Maybe?
Well, no.
Oh.
In some cases, it's quite the opposite. You'd be quite surprised to see what lengths people will go to hide their tracks or mask tracks as other animals. In one such example, a small-time poacher made sandals out of old and balding tires, the cracks of which closely mimicked elephants' feet, and their large diameter spread the load across the dirt to give similar indentations as the said animal. One of the reasons why he was caught is that elephants aren't known for walking on two legs.
True.
Okay, quick fourth wall break. I'm Zimbabwean, and there are certain words, such as the R word that is currently flashing up on screen, that can get me in some pretty serious trouble. So just know that when I say pre-Zimbabwe, I actually mean this word.
Oh!
Prior to the escalating conflict, Army Command had investigated other coin wars, such as the covert police involvement in the pre-Zimbabwean war, and showed that well-managed uprisings could only be beaten with boots on the ground and constant patrols. Both equestrian and bike units didn't operate much like the regular army. The tactics revolved around patrols and quick reaction forces to plan incursion and camps within Southwest Africa. Most of the tactics used by SWASPEs are still used today for anti-poaching actions across Africa, some of which I'll mention here.
And I'm glad that they're still using their stuff to basically stop poachers. Poachers suck. I don't. I just I'm one of those crazy people that thinks that we should protect the environment, and I also believe that sustainment hunting is okay, but I am not a fan of poachers in any way, shape, or form. In no way.
Daily patrols. These are the make or break routines that determine whether infantry are the ambushers or the ambushees, as well as assisted in finding enemy encampments, caches, recon outposts, and infiltration routes from the border from a common tracking technique called spoor, which is following the signs of movement, such as footprints, residual body odor, disturbed vegetation, extinguished fires, bodily waste, and signs of feeding. Other factors can be how fresh an animal carcass is, or the use of trash like plastics and chip packets to determine direction of movement and frequency of the route. Dogs are trained to assist patrol teams out in the field, especially with mine detection. Dogs can hear more, smell more, and are much faster in a dead sprint when it came time to corner or engage the enemy.
Yes.
However, dogs teams also have their downsides. Most notably, they're loud, growling and barking at a threat, whether it be an enemy infantryman, local wildlife, or excitability. Dogs also destroyed spoor, and their sense of smell would be hampered out in the hot weather, the smell evaporating faster. The use of dogs also meant
Can we use that dog?
extra food and water, which would laden the already loaded men, and it was eventually determined that dog teams would be more useful after spoor was found with the patrol teams rather than used as a daily thing. Camp locations are also quite important in this regard. The daily patrols and the use of on-the-ground trackers and the limited range that could be explored meant that camps were spaced intermittently, about every 30 or 50 kilometers, or closer when located near the border. These camps would have had larger interspersions between one another the deeper in the country you went. You can still kind of see this today, just as a more touristy version of luxury camps within game reserves. Game drives are not only used as a way to awe tourists with the sight of animals and the African landscape, but also as a way for rangers to keep tabs on animal movement through radio usage.
Okay.
A fairly common tactic for concealment is using animal paths. Especially those going through the thicket is a common route that insurgents will make use of, since insurgents also don't want to lose time achieving their own objectives and will often take the quickest and easiest route. These animal paths would be rich in spoor, both human and animal in nature, and it was a sad reality that a tracker could also be baited into a trap with the same methodology and led into tripwire mines.
The amount of things that you have to consider when you're looking at what they would have had to put together. The style of warfare here that is on display here is completely, radically different than anything that we here have probably ever even heard of. And so he's talking about concepts of warfare that go back just millennia of like setting up, like of tracking using actual sign, of ambush, of this is actually incredible. And I stopped commenting a little bit ago because I'm just listening to this and just trying to put myself in this position. This is actually one of the more radical videos that I've seen, as far as there is a modern military out there right now that has to consider these kinds of issues and problems when dealing with just their day-to-day functionality. And not so much, any kind of special military operations or anything like that. This is the day-to-day. They have to be able to respond to these kinds of threats and situations. So the issues that we in the United States would normally see as things that we need to focus on have nothing to do with this. And it's a completely different standpoint. It's a completely different stance.
However, one thing to note is how the enemy walked. Typically, people who have walked in shoes their whole lives will walk heel to toe. indenting the ground with their heel first and then kicking the sand back with their toes. However, those who were not gifted with regular shoes and who walked the landscape of Africa toe to heel, specifically kicking the sand with the ball of their foot to feel the ground for objects, then pressing their weight of their body down onto the ground. Animals, especially ungulates like kudu, impala, duiker, and others, kick and indent the tip of their hooves into the ground first before putting their weight down. Trackers could use this information to hunt enemy insurgents, even if the enemy had done a good job of cleaning up after themselves, as well as they would mask their trail with cows or goats, destroying their spoor and masking the scents from dog teams.
But thankfully, the SADF had expertise on their side. The Sand People, who in some cases still continue their nomadic way of life to this day, are arguably the best of the best when it came to hunting and tracking. Their skill was an invaluable asset to the Southwest African Territorial Force, though it was not only the Sand who lent their skill and experience. Most notably, game rangers and professional hunters alike also lent their skill and their knowledge on subjects like anti-poaching traps, such as snares, and reading the landscape, which later came in handy for anti-personnel mines.
Overall, one SWASPES, which includes the equestrian unit, its bike squad, and the various supporting elements, became an incredibly successful deterrent for Plan and MPLA forces looking to cross the border. My current understanding is that the idea of bike squad came from the pre-Zimbabwean Bush War, where the army used bikes as messengers and for long-distance patrols along the Zambian, Southwest African, and Mozambican border.
Okay.
I believe the bikes used were Yamaha 175cc motorbikes. However, I've not been able to confirm nor deny this. Ultimately, it's not clear what
Sounds like the United States talking about anything.
effect that these bikes and their team of riders had on the eventual outcome of the war. It is difficult to say what effect Bike Squad had on the entire outcome of the conflict. On one hand, their loud and boisterous engines mixed with incredibly skilled combat methods helped deter Plan and MPLA forces from entering, and their quick actions helped disrupt enemy encampments and smuggling. However, they were also incredibly loud and gave insurgents a head start to get the hell out. One SWASPES, and thus Bike Squad, would be dissolved in the early 1990s, and troops had the option of either joining the regular South African military forces, otherwise known as SANDF, or going on their own way. Irrespective of what the riders chose, Bike Squad helped form a long-standing love for motorbikes and long-distance trails. Okay,
There we go.
honest. I did not expect to see you at the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching until the end. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. This video has taken far longer than it should have, and that's mainly due to the complexity of the subject, the lack of information on the subject, and the lack of footage of the subject. It's been one of those bastarding videos. I'm sure someone else out there has done a better job than I have, but you know what? I'm fairly happy with this take. So, again, thank you very much for sticking until the end, and I will see you next time, whenever that is.
Okay, so this all goes back to things that I've said when I was watching the Rattel series, the Rattel video. This goes back to knowing your terrain, knowing the environment, knowing and purpose building an engine, purpose building a vehicle to meet a certain need. And this one in particular, this particular squad, this particular military unit was built for a purpose need for fast travel over rough terrain. And the threats that they'd be responding to. In order to join this unit, you had to, it was extremely selective from what he said. It came with up to a 90% attrition rate. There are special forces in the United States that do not have a 90% attrition rate applied to them. For this, you have squads that would sit there and be trained in horseback riding, motorcycle riding, bushcraft, everything like that, just to be able to perform their functions. That is a highly specialized unit. That is a ridiculously specialized unit. This was an absolute pleasure to learn about. I did not know about this. Of course I wouldn't. There'd be no way for me to know about this unless I actually focused on this period of time. But Warpugs, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I'm gonna have all Hobambles links in the description down there as well. Please check them out. Subscribe to them, subscribe to me. Check the links in the description below for my shop. Get yourself a shirt and join as a member of Patreon for early access. I'm taking off, Warpugs. Maybe I should get a bike and go up in the woods. I don't know. That probably wouldn't be a good idea for me.